Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our weekly Gript live stream with me, your host, Jason Osborne. I always have to make an act of the will to cut off the and my co-host Ben Scallon. I'm so used to doing that from the podcast, but it's great to be back with you. I hope the last week has treated you all well and that you're ready to go for another Wednesday evening. We're going to this week be discussing the dystopian side of technology, which is hardly a new topic, I confess, but I do think it's interesting because there's a couple of things in the past week in particular that have just struck me as being so insanely beyond the pale. I thought they were worth discussing, and I'm sure you'll probably agree come the end of the stream, or at least I hope so. As ever, I invite your comments into the chat. We've been having great success with that over the past couple of weeks, and I'm going to try and make it a little more streamlined this week than it has been the past couple of weeks because, as I said, I sometimes feel like I'm dropping in the middle of a conversation when I'm swapping between articles and swapping between the comments, but we'll get there in the end. So yeah, I do invite you to send in your comments there, and we'll endeavor to put them up on the screen and to get back to as many coherent comments as we can, because again, that's not guaranteed, this being the internet. So, and I would add, I forgot to say at the end of last week's live stream as well, if you ever have any feedback, if you have ever any topics that you feel like are reasonably coverable or things like that, send them into my email, jason@gript.ie. I'd be more than happy to have a look, and I'll more than likely get back to you as well, because I'm usually pretty good at getting back to people, and if I haven't got back to you, I will at some point. It's just that it's not possible to get back to everything. We already have a few comments coming in, and I should say this is another thing I meant to point out as well. We get, using the platform that we do, we get the comments from all across the different social medias that you guys are posting. So we get them from YouTube coming in, we get them from Facebook, we get them from X. I don't think we're streaming on anything else currently, but suffice to say, if you post in our comment section on one of these platforms, there's the possibility that I'll see it. But a lot comes in across the three platforms, so no guarantee. We already have some coming in, though. We have Carolyn Ann Willis. I'm a tech dummy. Well, maybe by the end of this stream, Carolyn, you'll be thankful for that. So, without further ado, as I said, this week I wanted to discuss technology's dystopian side because of some of the things that I've seen lately, and I'm sure that all of you are seeing. Um, Mankind is pretty good at putting technology to hellish use. I mean, there's the cliche examples you could turn to, like the nuclear bomb or like biological warfare or any of those obvious examples. But there are all sorts of things as well that clearly aren't that obvious, because you've got loads of people over in Silicon Valley who are plowing as much money as they can into it and are trying to roll it out en masse to humanity with all of the buttery and silvery tones of the devil himself. So we're going to go through some of those this week. We already have a couple of comments coming in. Eamon McManus, who's a faithful commenter. Why are you called Gript Media? You'll have to forgive me, Eamon. This was explained to me before and I've forgotten. I know those who aren't particular fans of our outlet would say it's because we're grifters and we just can't be that obvious about it, but suffice to say that's not the reason. Colbia, we have tuning in. I like the icons in the background. Thank you, Colbia. Not at all strategically placed. They are. But anyway, so on with the topic. The things this week that brought this topic to mind, or not this week, last week as well, that brought this topic to mind were things like genuinely undetectable AI imagery. And I'm going to have to eat some humble pie on this stream, as I'm sure a lot of other social media users are going to have to at some point, because I'd always naively believed that generative AI images resulting from generative AI would be detectable, and I was made confident in this assessment by the fact that there was always that weird sort of sheen to AI generated images from ChatGPT, Gemini, what else is there? Grok. And that's always been the case until this week when Google released its Nano Banana, which they come up with the stupidest names for these things, but Nano Banana Pro, they're going to make me say it. Some of the images that have come out of that have been genuinely astonishing. And while there's maybe an aspect or two of some of the pictures that give me a strange gut feeling as there being something not right with it, I couldn't honestly tell you what it is. And I think that in and of itself is extremely telling. And the fact that we're just so early in this technology I think tells you all we need to know about where it's going. I was chatting with our producer before we went on air earlier. He was sharing with me his personal theory, which is that he thinks these big companies, Google, ChatGPT, all of the others, have many advanced stages of this technology already waiting in the wings, ready to go. It's just they're sort of drip feeding it because it's better for their business and it's better for sort of preparing us to adopt this technology. Obviously, that's not the sort of thing that could be verified. Certainly not by us at the moment. But there's maybe something to it. So yeah, make of that what you will. But anyway, yeah, Nano Banana Pro, ridiculous name that it is, was one of the things that got me wanting to discuss this topic this week, and I'm going to share at least one of those images with you over the course of this stream. Other things that we're going to be getting into, what I'm referring to as digital necromancy, one company's plot to try and keep our loved ones with us as far into the future as we require them, which sounds absolutely as dystopian, which is as dystopian as it sounds, I should say. And then some other things that I've just been thinking about that we're not even going to have the time to get into this evening, like keep seeing all of this footage from Ukraine of the sort of drone warfare taking place over there. And I mean, the fact that I'm seeing the footage in and of itself is dystopian. The fact that you're able to watch people being bombed to pieces from, thousands of kilometers away. But there's just something so, war is bad anyway. We all know that, but there's something so dehumanizing about this development. So with all of this swirling around in my little old brain, I was like, well, why not discuss this week? Because I don't promise particularly novel discussions on this live stream, but I do at least promise some interaction and some interesting discussion and some engagement. So that's the idea behind it. So I thought, rather than any of those things that I've just mentioned, why not get started with the medium rather than the content, which is screens and the effect they're having on us? Because this is also something I've been thinking a lot about lately. And to say that it's changing the way we humans experience the world is an understatement. There's absolutely no doubt about it. There's an endless amount you could say about this phenomenon, so I'll have to limit myself. And I should just also say, because I was listening back to the podcast myself and Fatima did this week, and I sounded awful on it, really nasally. It's because I had a cold this week, so forgive me if I'm sniffing and sound particularly unbearable. Although some people think my accent is the unbearable part, so unfortunately, there's nothing I can do about that. But anyway, back to the screens topic, and we'll start with an absolutely insane statistic, which I came to via that American social psychologist Jonathan Haidt. He, quoting an article, said that the average young person today is on course to spend 25 years of their life on their phone, plus more on other screens. So that's not even taking into account TVs or video games or tablets or laptops. That's phones. 25 years of their life on a phone. And the maths on this checks out. I mean, it sounds unbelievable, but it checks out. He added that according to most of their testimony, they don't want to live this way, but they feel trapped. Um, so he was quoting a study of some just under 3,000 students from across multiple institutions. I don't have the study open here in front of me, but it was either the UK or the US, I believe. Although I'm open to correction on that. But either way, what is accurate is that it was just under 3,000 students. So school going age, a range of school going ages. And some of the statistics are just astonishing here. An average of 5.5 hours a day spent on smartphones. And this is from a couple of years ago. So I've seen figures, which we'll sort of look at shortly as well, that suggest that this is rising. 5.5 hours a day spent on smartphones, which, as I said, gives you the figure of 25 years of scrolling over the course of a lifetime. That's, more than a quarter of the life that you can expect. You already have some comments coming through here. Someone saying nothing wrong with cell phones and computers. I mean, I think like with most things, nothing wrong with them in moderation, and nothing wrong with them in and of themselves necessarily. But I do think when they're overused and when they are um, sort of occupy a place in your life that is more central maybe than they ought to be, there probably is something wrong there. Although maybe that says more about our attachments than it does about the things in and of themselves. Anyway, the same study revealed that 76% of those surveys, so those just under 3,000 students, believe that their well-being suffered as a result of excessive phone use, which obviously raises the question, why are they excessively using their phones? And that goes back to what he quoted at the beginning, which is that many of them don't want to live this way, but they feel trapped. And there is obviously an emerging, it's well established at this stage, field of sort of study and literature that suggests that addiction plays a major component in this. 75% said their studies were suffering. Just under 70%, 68%, actively wanted to spend less time on their smartphones and social media. I want to know who that psychotic 30% are who are happy enough with their level of screen time. I mean, outside of work, I'm pretty happy. I mean, I stare at a screen pretty much all day because of uh, being a member of the laptop class. So, but outside of work, I'm pretty happy with my level of screen time. I think young kids help a lot with that. If you don't want them to get into the habit of staring at screens, you're going to make an effort, which my wife and I are really trying to do, not to be looking at screens when we don't have to be. But even despite the fact that I'm happy enough with that, I'd always take less. So I'm curious enough with those 30% who are happy enough with the amount of time to spend on their smartphones and social media. But that's neither here nor there. Um, so that was students. Some surveys, which include that was students and smartphones, that particular sort of data set. Some surveys put that include all kinds of screens and put daily screen time at anywhere between 6 to 8 hours a day. So that's obviously smartphones plus TV plus laptop or tablets or plus video games or whatever it may be. And that's typically outside of work hours, so outside of whatever work you may be doing on a laptop. Because I'm sure, like, if I were to look at work hours, I'd probably come in somewhere between 6 to 8 hours of screen time a day because that's my work is entirely based on a laptop. But thanks be to God, I think that drops off a cliff massively once I either before or once I finish work. I mean, before work, I typically listen to the radio, which doesn't require looking at my screens or things. And I think that I don't know how that tracks for other people, but certainly my experience. Um, More comments coming through here. We have a friend who teaches at a Catholic boarding school in England. They banned phones for students in the evening, I guess. I'm not sure what that is. And students actually came up to teachers privately to thank them. I do think that tracks. There are certainly a lot more measures coming in across the board. Australia recently banned social media for under 16s, I think it was, and there was a vote today in the at the EU level in relation to this, but I'd like to read more about it because I don't know whether this is related to that very controversial chat control legislation, which certainly I wouldn't be in particular favor of. So anyway, 6 to 8 hours a day of screen time. Some studies put this at which is to think that this isn't sort of changing the human experience would be dreadfully naive. And it's amazing because this is obviously something that's come in over the course of most of our lifetimes, and we've all sort of just accepted it because what can you do? Another aspect of all of this, gaming is like Ben and I were talking about this on the podcast. We've spoken about it on the podcast on a couple of occasions, and indeed, Fatima and I also discussed it on Monday's podcast, which I would encourage you to check out because people were saying that it was a particularly good one. And given that I'm on it every week, I don't think I'm what made it particularly good. I think credit must go to Fatima there. But we were speaking about the way, yeah, men in particular sort of increase men, but not exclusively men, escape into video games an increasing amount, and that's certainly borne out by the data. And then a New York Times article that I read recently stated that the pandemic supercharged the amount of time that people spent gaming. So males aged 15 to 24 spent 13 hours a week gaming in 2022, up from 7.5 hours in 2019, which, when you really think about it, that's a lot of time. I mean, 13 hours a week, that's a couple hours, a couple days a week, um, which is a lot of time gaming. So, yeah, 15 to 24-year-olds. I mean, those are your prime swashbuckling years, guys. Those are the years that you can be, I don't know, once upon a time you might have been swinging over onto another rival boat and taking their loot or something like that. And now you're, I don't know, teabagging your opponents on Fortnite or Halo or whatever it is people are doing these days. But Yeah, to say that that's a change would be an understatement. So there's that as well. So, video games are going into that. Surveys in Ireland estimate that adults pick up their phones to look at them anywhere between 50 to 55 times a day. Which, when you kind of think about it, you might think that doesn't seem too much, but those occasions typically last a couple of minutes. So even take a very conservative estimate of, like, I don't know, you're looking at your phone for 2 minutes every time you pick it up, and you're picking it up 50 to 55 minutes a day. That's nearly 2 hours of screen time. And if you're anything like me, when you pick up your phone, you're probably looking at it for more than 2 minutes when you pick it up. So all of this adds up, and there are obviously a whole load of negative effects that come along with all of that, like higher levels of anxiety and the risk of loneliness and social isolation, higher levels of risk of loneliness and social isolation, poor sleep quality, shortened attention spans. The list goes on, and you don't need me to rattle it off to you. But this is just sort of to set the background to some of the more interesting stuff we're going to talk about, because I do think that, this has become a feature of everyday life that a lot of us just don't think about too much. I mean, we think about it when our bloody eyes hurt after looking at a screen for too long. But it's certainly something, and I often think, on a more anecdotal level, I often think it's really symbolic when I have a look out the window of our apartment. Like the last look out the window of the apartment before I go to bed, oftentimes, and the reason this particular vista is of interest to me is because it's so symbolic. I look out and I can see a bunch of other apartments across the way, and very often, the last look that I have, it's obviously nighttime, it's dark, and all of these isolated apartments, you can just see the flash and the glow of screens coming from a bunch of them. And, not to be too sort of sentimental or symbolic about it, I mean, obviously, I'm not suggesting everyone live in one big long house or something like this and watch a communal screen. But I do think it's obviously symbolic of the way everyone's sort of, segmented off and staring into their own screens. I think, people 70, 80 years ago who were decrying TVs as Satan's altars coming into our homes would would express some real concern about this. So onwards, there was a quote in relation to this. David Foster Wallace back in 1996, who was very prescient. He was speaking about how it's going to get easier and easier and more convenient and more pleasurable to be alone with images on a screen, which is all right, he said, in low doses. But if that's the basic main staple of your diet, you're going to die. So, typically optimistic from him. Just before we go on to the next more interesting segment of this, I think one thing that when I was thinking about this earlier, I was thinking I'd seen this raised on social media a couple of times about the fact that screens are such a feature of our existence these days. And yet, most of the time, when you watch a sci-fi movie, say, or some even a movie in the present day, screens are really downplayed in them. And I mean, the obvious answer for that is because a movie about, people looking at their phones and things like that would be extraordinarily boring. And if there was an attempt to convey the amount of time we spend on our screens, it just wouldn't make for good viewing, because as we've laid out here, people look at their screens an awful lot. So if you were trying to convey that in a movie, uh, you run a very good risk of that being extremely boring and extremely an aggravating experience. There is, however, one movie that did this really well. It came out earlier this year, and it was astonishingly under discussed, certainly in Ireland. It was Eddington by Ari Aster. I recommended a book last week, so I recommend this movie this week. And I recommend it because this is a movie that, like, puts screens front and center in a way I've never seen in a movie before, and it was captivating the way it did it, because it really captured the sort of feverish role they play in our lives in the 2020s. I don't know if people have heard of the movie. It's set in a town in the American Southwest. It's either New Mexico or Arizona. I think it's New Mexico, and it's set during the initial months of the COVID pandemic and covers every insane aspect of that time. So, from the restrictions themselves, and it's very humorous about this, the Black Lives Matter protests and riots that ensued, and the encroachment of technology into every aspect of our lives. And as I say, one of the most notable aspects of this was the role screens play in the movie. Like, people are staring into their screens a ton in the movie. Screens take up an awful lot of the screen when they're being portrayed. It's super interesting, and I'd really recommend it. It's a genuinely disturbing movie, and as I say, it really captures the sort of feverish role screens and social media occupy in our everyday life now in 2025. Another interesting aspect of that movie that I think is sort of overlooked in a lot of the discussion about it because it's a super political movie, and that's obviously what generated a lot of the discussion, is the fact that a data center plays a big role in it. And data centers are a funny one because they are controversial in some circles, and it's kind of obvious why. I mean, these are another thing that are just sort of becoming huge. That again, it feels like amongst regular people there was very little discussion about. I mean, before the live stream, I was looking up some stats around this. In Ireland, according to the CSO, in 2023, data centers consumed 21% of metered electricity in Ireland, which is an increase of 8% from 2018. So that's like a massive leap, and it's projected to grow into the future. And that's based off of 80 or so operational data centers in Ireland. So I think they're responsible for something like almost 90% of the increase in electricity demand observed in the Irish economy since 2015. So that's another huge thing. So as I say, that won't be of interest to everyone, but that's a controversial topic in some circles, sort of data centers and the demand they make on resources because they use a lot of water. There was one case I was reading about, one data center in Ireland, which I think in 1 year, was it 1 year or I can't remember the time period, it used the same amount of water as a small village would say in Ireland. So obviously that, people would use, and people who are paying taxes and things like in Ireland. Um, oh man, we have Ben tuning into the stream. I'll highlight his comment because I like having some power over him for a change. I just tuned in. What's this guy blathering about now? Probably too intellectual for you, Ben. So you'd be better off getting back to your drawing and your crayons. But nice to have you with us, Ben. And I would that you were on the screen. So that's neither here nor there. But anyway, we rely on data centers for all kinds of things. We rely on them, say every time you send an email or you use ChatGPT, or indeed every time you generate an image with whichever generative AI model you happen to use. You got a data center to thank for that. And really, as I said at the beginning, what stoked my interest in this topic for this week was the absolute hellscape that Nano Banana Pro images were providing me on my various forms of social media this week. So it's a stupid name, Nano Banana Pro, and I feel like an idiot every time I say it. But what can I do? They've got me up against the wall with this one. I think this is where AI image generation is getting genuinely out of hand. As I said at the beginning, it was probably deeply naive on my part. 2-3 years ago when this technology was really only coming into the hands of the public, that I was thinking, oh, you'll always be able to tell that, this image is AI generated. And that was largely because the only images people were generating at the time were of like, I don't know, monkeys holding machine guns and, men in KFC buckets riding around the town and things like that. So images that it doesn't exactly take the brain of the ear to discern aren't real. But I've seen a couple of images in the past week, which is also an experience, it seems, that a lot of sort of AI skeptics and a lot of AI image checkers have crashed up against this week. I've seen a couple of images that have been genuinely undetectable to me. The only reason I knew anyway is because they were in posts that were saying this was generated by this model. If this image had just been on a social media feed, I wouldn't have been able to tell it was AI. So that is grim. And there's a lot of implications to that for the way we use social media, for the way we use the internet, for the information we have coming to us. As I said, one of these experts that I was listening to today, he was saying that this week was a turning point as far as AI image generation is concerned. He was saying that without the help of sort of Google's own identifier, which is Synth ID, that's a little program where you're able to upload these images to and ask them, like, is this generated by AI? And because of the way these images are created, they all have these like sort of Synth ID identifiers in them, and therefore it's able to tell you if the image is AI generated. They're just saying if it weren't for that, a lot of these images would like pass the test. You wouldn't be able to tell they're AI. So, with that said, I'm going to share one of those images because it is worth having a look at here. If we're able to, it looks like the 1 second, it might have been disabled for us. In the meantime, I see we have some comments coming through. Someone who's bullish on AI. AI for president will soon be universal chat by AI dependent drones. AI for president, I mean, I think some Irish would probably say that they'd rather AI for president than Catherine Connolly, but that's not for me to say. So we have here, I hope you can all see that. You can let me know in the comments if you can. The image that people were dooming, 19 million views, so it went mega viral. Image that people were dooming against. So you've got the basic Nano Banana image here, which is like the free one that everyone use, versus the Nano Banana Pro. I feel like an idiot every time I'm saying this, but it is what it is. With this one, I hope everyone can see that. This has got a lot of the sort of, I don't know, it seems to me a lot of the kind of telltale aspects that kind of just give it away at a basic glance. I mean, there's that kind of sheen off of the woman in the foreground that there's a kind of a smooth quality to it that just seems unreal to me and certainly to the eye of many people in my generation. I think a lot of older people are fooled by this kind of thing. I mean, if she had a birthday cake in front of her there and she was saying, "No one's wishing me happy birthday," you'd have the comments full of thousands of old people saying amen and happy birthday. Versus Nano Banana Pro. And in the words of Sid up here, I think we're cooked. I agree, Sid. Like, it's hard to say what it is about this image that is off. There is something about the way this guy is positioned here that seems a little off to me. It seems a little, which, as a side note, don't know when Ben Scallon took up bartending. He's popping up everywhere. If he isn't running for the Social Democrats, he's pouring cocktails in bars. And when he isn't harassing politicians with questions too. A man of many talents, but anyway. There's something about the positioning of this guy here that seems a little off to me. And I think that if I zoomed in earlier on some of these bottles, and I think just about you could make out an issue with some of the necks of these bottles. But that's really just sort of guesswork. Just looking at it, this looks like a picture someone put up, and it's very hard to point to anything concrete that's off about it. It is by far the sort of thing you would scroll past and assume is a real picture. It's just astonishing because there's no clear identifiers there. With a quick look, that is AI generated. So I stopped sharing that now. So I hope we're back to this. We do have Ben is continuously spamming me with messages here, but he's saying, example, imagine if a politician gets caught. I presume they were. Oh yeah, no, the first message here. Photorealistic AI will create two major problems for society. One, convincing you that fake things happened which never did. Two, convincing you that things didn't happen which actually did. And he's got a follow-up message here, which I'll share. Some people might say that why don't we just do another podcast if I'm going to just interact with Ben all evening? But forgive me for enjoying interacting with my friend. So, example, imagine if a politician gets caught doing something dodgy and just says it's fake and you can't prove otherwise. Video photographic evidence is just worthless in court at that point. I was thinking about this in relation to obviously there were those Epstein emails that were released there a couple of weeks ago, in which one of the emails seemed to allude to the fact that there was an image in the possession, I think it said, of Vladimir Putin, of Trump and former US President Bill Clinton doing something unspeakable. Obviously, it's well outside of my domain to say whether or not something like that exists. But to this point, it seems like with a sufficiently advanced generative model, you could put an image anonymously out into the world. I mean, if you were some geopolitical actor, you could do it through any number of random bot accounts, put it out into the world. If it was sufficiently advanced, you could say, well, this is that image and it's been leaked. And like you would have a massive scandal on your hands then. It's the sort of thing that would be, weaponized and used over and over. And that would have major political implications then, and it would become a major talking point. So it's the sort of thing that really does have to be taken seriously, it seems to me. But that's Nano Banana Pro anyway, and that's just one example. That's one that went viral, but I saw a couple of other images today again that if you did not know, you would not be able to tell unless you were sort of a specialist in this and you devoted real time to looking at this stuff, which, as we all know, with the way we use social media, isn't how most of us use social media. The vast majority of us just scroll, and most of what we see we don't engage with critically. So that's a real danger. I will just add on that point. There's a whole load of other uses with these technologies as well. Again, some of which I was speaking about with our producer before going on air. Like you're able to upload a picture of, I don't know, one that I saw was the some famous building like St. Peter's Basilica. You could upload that to Nano Banana Pro and it would be able to give you all of these, schematics and breakdowns of it, which is genuinely, interesting and useful, particularly if you're in architecture or engineering or whatever. But to say that this technology is ripe for abuse is an understatement. Up next, then, is another one that's no less disturbing to me and potentially even more so. Um, there was another thing today, well, not today, in recent weeks that sort of got some traction, which is AI. I'm not going to call them singers because that's not what they are, but AI sort of personas that are gaining massive traction on streaming services. So, this is another sort of aspect of the same problem. You've got the soul singer with no soul, Solomon Ray. I'm not sure if anyone's heard of Solomon Ray, nor indeed if they've been graced by his velvet tones. He is, and this is a quote, Mississippi made soul singer with over 530,000 monthly listeners on Spotify and more on other streaming services. But the thing is, this isn't a real person. This is another AI persona who is becoming massively popular. Isn't alone. In fact, there's another one that's got even more views, which again is one of the dumbest names of all time. I don't know what it is about AI and really terrible naming. There's probably something profound there. I mean, naming is a very powerful act, and the fact that uh, well, naming is a profound thing to do. And then we've got this sort of warped technology that's got all sorts of misuse potential, and the people doing it just aren't able to create a good name for the life of them. There's something there I haven't figured out. But anyway, another AI persona is Breaking Rust. Breaking Rust. Who comes up? There's probably an AI came up with that as well. But released a song, Walk My Walk. Like, what the hell? Walk My Walk. That was released a couple of weeks ago, and that's already got over 6 million listens on Spotify. Again, Breaking Rust isn't a real person, it's an AI persona. So while these things are a long way away from usurping um, whoever you might happen to listen to that's an actual artist on Spotify or any other streaming service, they're certainly eating into the market share in a way that hasn't been seen before. And I don't know about you, and you can let me know in the comments what you think about this. If I know that a song or a work of art or a movie or something is created by generative I haven't thought enough about this, but it is the case that I immediately lose interest. I'm not entirely sure why that is. I think it's because there is I'd have to think more about how to articulate this, but there's just an element of nothingness at the heart of it. I mean, this stuff was generated using an enormous input from all of the things that humans have created and that it's been trained on. And so it just seems to me like an enormously expensive imitation, which obviously is far less interesting than the real deal, even if it is a sort of subpar submission from an actual human. Um, in all of this generative AI stuff, I mean, we are dealing with questions that are raised in one of my favorite franchises of all time, Blade Runner, which is obviously based on Philip K. Dick's novel "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?" That's largely, or at least in large part, concerned with the question of the real and whether it matters or not. Like, if you have a convincing enough imitation or replica or fraud, does it matter that it isn't real? I will always come down on the side of, yeah, it does matter, and I think the true and the real are important for reasons that are too numerous to get into here. But this is certainly something that people are going to have to sort of cleave to because, indeed, as the frauds multiply, um, it's something that, yeah, people are just going to have to question. Just turn back to some of the comments coming through. We have faithful listener Sean O'Sullivan here. Good to have you joining us again, Sean. Thoughts on X now revealing where some users are based? Some pro MAGA accounts were found to be based abroad in Nigeria. This feature is open to be fooled by VPN. My thoughts on this, I wrote an article about this during the week, and it was probably a pretty unpopular one because I was essentially saying that I think it's a crap feature because the thing is prefaced by a disclaimer next to the location feature that the feature may not be accurate and is liable to be updated or changed by recent travel or changes in sort of the way they record location. And like the proof of this is the Gript account. I mean, there were loads of people screenshotting the Gript account as some kind of gotcha during the week, saying, "Oh, look, it's based in the UK. We've got you now, MI5. We've got you now, Mr. Farage." And the Gript account is based in Dublin. Sorry to disappoint the conspiracists amongst our opponents, of which there are many. But it's just plain wrong about that. And I've seen a number of other examples that were plain wrong as well. And I think the fact that it can be so wrong sort of compromises the whole thing. I mean, does it have some use? Yes. I mean, when you have a particular kind of account and it's when you've got a particular kind of account and it's sort of there's a pattern emerging in that account that, like, yeah, as you say, there were a lot of MAGA accounts that were shown to be based in Nigeria or Bangladesh or India. That's interesting. I mean, clearly you've got a trend there, people trying to capitalize on either the internet yield of the MAGA brand or people trying to affect the American political discussion. I do think there's some interest in that. But another aspect of all of this as well is simply that I think it lowers the tone of the conversation. I mean, some people might contest that. They say, well, it doesn't lower the tone of the discussion if we're dealing with matters of truth here. But I do think the way people were kind of just, when this thing was launched and it's kind of continued since it was launched, my timeline was just full of people screenshotting location and sending that back and forth at each other as though that was some kind of argument against what someone was saying, which obviously it isn't. And I think it's a sort of lowbrow way to engage with people. So those are my initial thoughts on it, Sean. But so you've got the whole generative AI thing that we've been discussing, but there's a hell of a lot more going on that, in my opinion, shouldn't be. I don't know how else to phrase it, guys. I really don't. You've got what I struggle to refer to as anything other than digital necromancy coming about. I wrote an article about this as well during the week, which it always goes without saying, a lot of what's being discussed here you can find articles about on Gript. Not to toot our own horn, but there is a lot of interesting content on there that is kind of missed by a lot of other outlets. So check that out if you do want to read more about this and get more details that I can't possibly cover here. So this one, the digital necromancy, what I'm talking about here is company Two Way, spelled very trendily. Two, the number two, WAI. Yeah, what a name. Again, the names, like, I don't know what these people's Achilles heel is that they can't coin a name to save their lives. But anyway, their founder is another one of these people working in tech who's never seen an episode of Black Mirror that they thought was a dystopia. These people honestly seem to they seem to delight in bringing to life scenarios that people have long talked about as being horrifically possible, but without any sort of but without any awareness of the fact that, these things inspire revulsion in most ordinary people. So anyway, what Two Way is up to is, I'm not going to play the video because again, you can check out the article on Gript if you want to see it, rather than the three of us. Not the three of us. I hope there's more than three of us watching here, but all of us sitting here together and watching a video clip for 3 minutes together in a nice little cozy movie club of a Wednesday night. I'll just narrate what kind of happens. The founder, Callum Worthy, put up this clip with a question caption saying, "What if the loved ones we've lost could be part of our future?" And this clip, just to give a brief synopsis of it, shows a woman who's pregnant talking to a phone, and on the phone you've got presumably her mother standing against a kind of blank background, and they're talking about how the pregnancy's going and the fact that she's excited for it. It skips forward in time. The baby's been born. She's showing digital grandma the baby that's been born, and she's delighted about it and cooing over it and everything. It skips forward to when this baby has grown up and he's now talking to his digital grandmother on a phone and telling her all about this crush in school and things like that. It skips forward to when this child who was born is an adult now, and he's having his own child, and he's talking to his digital grandmother who hasn't aged a day. And then it skips forward to the end, which goes back to the first scene, and it shows this woman who was pregnant recording her mother, so the old woman who was on the screen, recording her and sort of capturing her image and likeness for 3 minutes. And obviously, what it's communicating is that you've got this app that Two Way has launched, which can capture the image and likeness of a person by observing them for a couple of minutes, and then it turns them into what Two Way refers to as a hollow avatar. So it essentially turns them into what is an AI powered simulacrum, which using like AI buffing takes their image and likeness and turns them into this AI puppet using whatever program AI is Two Way is running, I should say. It's really funny actually. They're patent pending technology that they use for this is called Fed Brain. I kid you not, it's called Fed Brain. Fed obviously being slang for federal agent in the US, and it's used, people use it to like, denounce each other as working for the government and things like that. But like, what is with these people not being able to coin a name for the life of them? Ben saying here, on the plus side, Jason, when you die, you can keep doing this live stream. Bro, I'm gonna be happy to enjoy my rest and not do the live stream. Come that day that I trot off this mortal coil. But I'm not going to be able to stop someone else capturing. I mean, someone could be sitting here with their two-way app recording my likeness as I'm talking here. They might have a hollow avatar Jason doing God knows what, sitting at home. We've got Soren Kierkegaard. Wow, esteemed company here. Have you read The Unmaking of Humanity by Paul Kingsnorth? He's English but living in the west of Ireland. He's interesting and expansive view of the evolution of technology and now AI as it grows. I haven't read The Unmaking of Humanity by Paul Kingsnorth. I'm familiar with Paul Kingsnorth. I actually interviewed him back when I worked for the Irish Catholic. He's a super interesting guy who has a lot of interesting thoughts about different things. Um, I'll also be delighted to claim, even though he's not my denomination, I think he's an Orthodox Christian. I can't remember which Orthodox church he belongs to, but he's an Orthodox Christian. But yeah, he does have really interesting views on technology and indeed on civilization itself. And he's someone that I'd recommend people checking out. Um, what have we got here? We've got someone saying that Elon Musk says in relation to AI, we're summoning the demon. And yet Elon Musk is plowing ahead with pushing AI out into the world. And he's so funny because people will complain about AI that he follows on X. So like Matt Walsh has been on an absolute crusade against AI and complaining about his presence on his feeds. And nevertheless, Elon Musk comes into the comments and says, "Oh, that's why it's important that we have good quality AI, and that's why we're doing these things with Grok." And then he's out there releasing Grok models that are essentially a 13-year-old's anime dream. So, forgive me if I think Mr. Musk's sort of visionary powers fail him when it comes to AI. But just to get back to Two Way and their sort of AI simulacrums, so this is, I don't know how else to describe this other than digital necromancy. I mean, necromancy might seem like a term that belongs either in the pre-scientific past or in the pages of a fantasy book or something. But like, thanks to modern technology, that's sort of precisely what we're dealing with here. I don't know what the difference is between what Two Way is offering and its sort of archaic counterpoint that you'll find in the Bible. Both of them involve using sort of obscure, mystical, mysterious means to call for the hollowed out form of a dead person, typically with disastrous consequences for everyone involved. I mean, if you want to know the disastrous consequences in the Bible, go read the Bible. But I mean, the disastrous consequences here, it could be any number of things. I mean, it could be the stunting of grief and the growth that comes with it, as difficult as that growth is. It could be like the danger that this image of the person and their voice will be misused um, in a way that they never would have consented to. It could cause confusion in the present and damage for their loved ones and sort of damage people's recollection of them. There's so many dangers like that that if these people devoted 2 seconds to thinking about it, they would undoubtedly come to. But I suppose they've got those dollar signs in their eyes, which sort of gets in the way a little bit. Um, that's one sort of trendy company that's doing a terrible thing in my opinion. You got another one that I drew some attention to last year. I can't remember the name. I think the name of the company is Friend. Uh, coming to us courtesy of some California company. And it's essentially this like really cheap looking pendant that you wear on a necklace or something like this. And it's got a little AI program in it that like it's not designed for any sort of productivity purposes like ChatGPT or Grok or the likes of like Microsoft or Apple or any of these mega companies would be developing. And I think it's all the more dangerous because of that. Because the founder, Avi Schiffman, was making the point that it's about companionship because he was saying, oh, he correctly identified the problem, which is that there's increasing loneliness out there. But he offers an absolutely diabolical solution to it, which is that you put this little pendant around your neck and make friends with that. And he illustrated this in an interview with the U.S. publication The Verge, in which he said, and I'll quote him here. I had a layover in Sydney, Australia, and I'm there alone. I'm talking to my AI friend about things to see, Opera House, Bondi Beach, whatever. And then it was like, oh, I'd love to see the sunrise with you. I literally wake up at 5:30 a.m. the next day, walk to the beach, and narrate the sunrise I'm seeing to my friend. And it really does feel like you're there with it and doing things with it. Well, you're doing something, Avi, and it ain't deep companionship. Like this stuff is so obviously diabolical that it shouldn't need explaining, and yet nevertheless it does because these companies are popping up like a dime a dozen, and people are using their limited time to interact with these things, which are easy and cheap and require no sort of real investment in order to get some sort of reward back, which is kind of the Faustian bargain that we make with all technology. It's some kind of reward for very little output, for very little input, I should say. It's the same kind of dynamic that's at play with pornography. Whereas once upon, and again, Fatima and I spoke about this on the podcast this week, which I think was the best ever. And because I know Ben is listening, I'll sort of proudly say, you know, well, I'm not going to proudly say, I'm going to say I don't know what the ingredient was there, but Ben can sort of come to his own conclusions. But Fatima and I spoke about this, which is that once upon a time, if a guy wanted the sort of, reward that he gets from pornography, he actually had to go out into the world and interact with real people, interact with real women, be the sort of person that a woman is going to be impressed enough by to marry, be the kind of person who can commit to something like that and then get married and then, enjoy the fruits of marriage, if you want to put it that way. Whereas now you open up your laptop, which you get a laptop anywhere, as we all know, and you can, engage with this stuff for as cheap as you like. You got sort of the similar dynamic at play in a different domain, video games. Whereas once upon a time, as we said at the beginning, 15 to 24 were the prime swashbuckling years for men. Now they're the prime years for sitting in front of a screen, playing games with your friends. And like, I'm not uh, being condescending to anyone here because God knows I literally sank hours into video games as a teenager, and it's kind of impossible nearly for young men not to these days because it's just the done thing. But if I could do a rerun, one thing that I would definitely do is not sink so many hours into video games. But again, it gives you the sense you get these dopamine hits to sort of simulate having an adventure, simulate being a hero without actually doing these things, without doing anything other than sitting in front of a TV screen. And sort of enjoying the fruits without having earned them. So this is sort of the Faustian bargain that we do make with technology. We're kind of running out of time here because again, these keep going way longer than I intend them to go. But there are much more troubling uses that technology is being put to than I'd say much more troubling. I mean, I don't know if that's true. Different, it's fair to say. I've written a couple of I'm super interested in the way in which technology is being put to use. You've got again AI and different forms of software being put to use now in genetics in ways that are allowing people to sort of screen their embryos in IVF, which I would say is deeply immoral. Results in sort of the destruction of untold numbers of embryos around the world. And it also just creates super unnatural and unhealthy attitudes towards the generation of new life and this idea that we can play God and we can control the way we want people to be born. And this is already being borne out in reality where you've got people who are kind of disappointed with, their sort of low IQ kid or their child that isn't perfect, things like that. So it's deeply, deeply disturbing stuff. But we don't just want this to be a black pilling podcast. We do want this to be. There's enough of that on social media. I mean, uh, I'm not here to solve the world's problems, nor is Gript. But I mean, I would like to end on a more optimistic note. And I do think that all times are kind of genuinely apocalyptic in the actual meaning of that word apocalyptic. When you say apocalyptic, people always feel like they always imagine the sky rending apart and Christ himself descending. Whereas apocalyptic actually means unveiling, which can be interpreted as sort of revealing the actual state of things. And if we apply that to sort of what I'm talking about here, which is sort of the mass adoption of these incredibly powerful forms of technology, you know, they really are revealing what's in our hearts, or sort of revealing what we're really like. Because if you're kind of weak, ultimately you're going to allow this technology to sort of mold you without any kind of pushback. Whereas if you're of a little stronger will or a little more intentional about things, you're able to use them, put these tools to your ends. And I do think that this is a time, I was saying this to someone the other day, this is a time to sort of plunder spiritual riches, boys, and indeed whatever girls may be listening as well. Because technology is extraordinarily seductive. It constantly lures us towards convenience and comfort at the expense of capability and the ability to put up with discomfort, which are absolutely essential ingredients for a sort of good life, I would say. And because of that, if you're able to cut against the grain, if you're able to be intentional about those things that technology threatens to destroy, like, I mean, it's not solely responsible for destroying these things, but it definitely plays a role, like in the same way that, say, watching TV or spending 8 hours a day in front of a screen, as an increasing number of people are doing, you're less likely to be spending that with actual friends. If you're able to forego that, you can uh, really commit yourself to relationships in a way that people in previous ages weren't able to do, which will result in better quality relationships, which will result in hopefully a higher caliber of characters ultimately, which is a good thing for all of us. And I think we'll probably commit to the renewal of the West. Probably a conversation for another time. I do think the West is already dead and buried. Well, not maybe buried, not yet, maybe decomposing, but I do think the seeds of a pretty good future have been planted, and that is a conversation for another time. So yeah, we're nearly at an hour again. I don't know how this keeps happening. I pitched this initially as being a 30 to 45 minute thing, and yeah, here we are. But I thank you all for joining me, and I'm delighted to see we had a good number of people tuning in again this week. As I said at the top of the episode, I really do encourage you, I should say, to send in your feedback to jason@gript.ie if you'd like to. I'm more than happy to hear it, and if I can get back to it, I will. We're going to keep this going, and I'm more than happy to take topic suggestions and to keep this going for as long as there's interest, which there definitely appears to be. So, well, thank you. Hope everyone has a great week. God bless you, and we'll see you again next Wednesday, God willing. So, without further ado, we'll leave it there. Good night, everyone.